I'm a co-founder of Invictus Global Management. I am so honored to be interviewing you today. So I wanted to start off our conversation for TIE 10 with a little bit of background on yourself, if that's okay with you. Can you tell us a little bit about where you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Ty, for having me. I'm Eric Newman. I'm a treasury manager with the city of Stamford in Connecticut. In addition, I serve as a trustee on several of our pension plans. Total combined assets under management over 5 different plans is $875 million. We invest across the board. Some funds are in private equity, private credit, as well as the more traditional asset allocations of global equities, bonds, and other allocations. I also serve as a trustee on the town of Fairfield's pension plan. That pension plan has $450 million under management, and similar thing, it's across the board, private equity, private real estate, bonds, equities, and that's pretty much where I am right now.
Wow, that sounds quite impressive, given your breadth of experience and your mandate. So for Tide, one of the factors that we like to consider is diversity. That's the topic du jour. So for us at Invictus, we are a women and minority-owned firm. We're founded on the principle of forming teams with complementary skills and diverse viewpoints for the purpose of good performance, because we think it serves our investment objectives of delivering superior returns for our partners. When you look for managers, given your broad mandate and given your wide breadth there, do you factor in diversity initiatives? And if so, what are these initiatives and how do they serve your investment goals?
Sure. Where I'm currently, we do not have within our investment policy a specific diversity and inclusiveness policy. One of the plans, we do have an ESG policy, and we recently added more strength to it by adding the proxy voting initiative into our own plan. Our plans are primarily we invest with consultants and OCIOs, and we're investing in various different funds. So even during the discussion of adding the proxy voting thing, we knew that we weren't going to be changing Vanguard's fund who has trillions of dollars under management. Our decision making isn't going to impact them. They're going to vote how they view everything. But we felt it was important to be a municipality to have that included, because any manager that comes to us in the future will see that they read our investment policy and they see ESG, they see proxy voting. It sends a message. It says, okay, we are looking for a different type of investment strategy going forward. And I think that's part of it. Working in a city government, we're very diversified, which is one of the benefits of where I am. You get to everybody's from all over the place, and we serve a lot of individuals and families who are really our constituents, our customers of government, is at times new to our country. And you saw this past year, the part of our government was always open, and who they serve, the people individuals who are being challenged so much, while others, like myself and working in finance, we're working from home and we have a totally different strategy. So we were able to, pivot there, and it's part of our DNA to ensure that we're being inclusive, and that definitely resonates when I'm serving on other boards, because when you're used to a certain melting pot, you're going to bring that DNA with you wherever you go. And if you see an opening on a board, or it's going to, you're going to say, who am I looking for? I look around the table and I said, okay, everybody looks like me. This isn't going to continue, and it takes time to change. But when you're educated and you understand it, it's much easier to advocate more for more diversity, even if it's with a manager. There'll be managers that, might come along, and, first thing I'm doing, even though it might not be in our RFP, I look at board makeups, I look at the leadership team. If they're making progress, or then it's going to be challenging. On the flip side, manager might say, okay, we're going through our process, will be quickly eliminated because they might not be the right size, might not have a business in Connecticut, which at times comes into play. If you're a municipal government, you say, okay, we want to get somebody within our region. But when I see that it might be a minority-owned or women-owned business, and I say we got to invite them in, just why would we exclude them? Because you might not have operations in Connecticut. Well, if we became a client of theirs, they suddenly do have an operation in stake in Connecticut or in the region. So it plays a part.
Excellent. Excellent. Sounds like you've got a super robust way of looking at diversity initiatives with near-term, initiatives as well as long-term view. So kudos to you and tremendous given the fact that, you don't have a discrete policy per se, but it's sort of how you do it on a day-to-day. In other words, it's part of your DNA. So in looking at the DNA of a manager, you had mentioned it. I just want to touch on what you had just mentioned. How do you assess the DNA of a team? Like, is it through meetings, through calls? Like, how do you get to know your manager and sort of their fundamental makeup?
I think it's a long-term relationship. Probably the best relationships are ones that started a long time ago. It might be a board member who met them years ago at a conference. It might be our consultant who's obviously does a lot of due diligence. If they're bringing the consultant or OCIO is making a recommendation for an investment manager, they've done their due diligence, and they know, if their policies and their DNA is in line with ours, which is times, they know if we have some of our ESG policies, we're choosing investment managers or consultants who also believe in that path. So part of it's that way, and just gain a feel of it. And this past year has been challenging. There's no in person. There's been no in person for a year on both sides. And, people say, is it harder to assess somebody? Well, everybody is so connected, right? Everybody can quickly contact us. We're all separated, not by many degrees. And you do your reference checks. You see who they, it's different circles, right? If you're in the private equity industry, it's a small group. If it's different industries, and everybody, you do your due diligence as if you're doing any sort of investment. Reputation is always important. Last thing you need as a public pension plan is to have an investment manager that has something awful going on, and it becomes front page news versus everything else. When I was in a private organizations, you didn't have this transparency that you have in public service, where you do one thing wrong and it's the front page of your newspapers and it gets spread around much quicker. And in private industry and private companies, at times, these things are kept much more quieter, unless it's something really major. And so you have that, that balance. So everything we do is, we have to go the extra step, make sure we know who we're working with, and as well as who their clients are at times. Who else are we partnering up in a fund? Everything is so transparent.
Yeah, that's super interesting, as you mentioned, because you're right. The virtual world that we live in today, there's just a lot of information, a lot of data, but we forget that you're operating in a fishbowl, and especially in a public with a public structure such as yours, you have just being mindful of the overall dynamics. That said, given notwithstanding the difficulties of the pandemic and notwithstanding the need to communicate virtually, have you been able to meet with new managers this year?
Yeah, like I am today. As we've met before, but Zoom or different virtual platforms has really, I think, shrunken the world. You no longer have to, you have an initial meeting or several meetings to be in person. To have a manager fly across the world or across the country to meet with you for 15 minutes at a board meeting at night I think you don't need that anymore. You could have a Zoom conference. You could have a different type of virtual conferences. A lot, attend a virtual conference, and you might not necessarily connect as you have in person, but you could always make an arrangement to connect afterwards, set up a time where it's more convenient versus you probably get more time and you get to deeper conversations versus somebody else want to talk to me or you want to talk to them, and you could able to block out time. As international investors, you can take a phone call, a virtual call with across the world, people in Asia, people in Africa, in Europe, in Latin America, and so from that aspect, I think it's much easier now. Everybody has gotten used to this virtual communication. Previously, you might have been more hesitant. So, I'm not going to contact, somebody in another country, so, but with the adaption of these platforms, and it's so common that it's no longer a barrier. Somebody, in the future says, they can't make it to an in-person meeting. You should be flexible, and that's what you want. Even our boards, how flexible our boards meetings are now. We're keeping more compact. We know the agendas. We know, okay, somebody has to, sign off earlier because they have another commitment, a family commitment. It's much easier. It brings in the reality of people's different situation and diversity. We have older individuals who might be board members who say, okay, I'm not going to be on this board because it's at night, and to come home at 11:30 at night, might not be the most beneficial thing in the wintertime for them. If they could continue to call in on a Zoom call into our meetings, it just makes it that much better and all around.
Excellent. So I was, my next question for you, I was thinking about whether or not for the pandemic has actually made it harder, but it sounds like it's actually made it easier for managers to get meetings. But do you think, because one of the questions that we are often asked is that, given the highly competitive landscape for investment management talent, so now that manager meetings are easier, how do you source talent for your mandates? And how does it come to you? Is it through just word of mouth, introductions, or are you actively out there, on a list? Like, what is that process like from your sitting in your shoes?
So from my perspective, anything that comes to our board is going to be going through our consultants or OCIOs. That's really the gatekeepers to our boards. For me personally, I'll go out and interact with managers wherever I can, because you never know, down the road they might be the ones that are coming through us, and to have already a relationship or know somebody and know an organization, it's easier to inform, brings reassurance, right? That word of mouth, that connection to the other board members. Somebody met them at different events, and they're known in the industry, and you have the resources or it might be as a reference. Many times, we'll look at other communities that, in the public sector, who else is investing in this particular manager or this consultant. That's very common. And you're looking at the neighboring towns, neighboring cities in the region, and we all know each other from various organizations or past interactions, whether you work for somebody in the past, it's a small industry, and to pick up the phone and to say, here's a reference, makes it much easier. From the investment perspective, for us, obviously, it's always going to be challenging for any emerging manager, just given our size. While we have, sizable assets, our structure is at the moment in larger funds. If we went to a state plan, the state of Connecticut, for their retirement plans, which part of our employees are a part of it, the part of the teachers' retirement plan, they have a diversity and inclusiveness policies up there at the state level. And every time I'm always looking at the state level, because they're leading the way, right? They're the big ships who are moving along. They move slowly, but they do everything. They have resources, and when they put out research, when they put out policies, it sets a tone, because eventually it'll work its way down to the local level governments, and seeing that is a good resource, and that's another good way of for emerging managers to say, okay, I look at investment policy. If you see an investment policy that has, or policies that have diversity and inclusiveness in there, okay, this is a target. This might be an investor that's going to be more willing to take the call to invest in. And when you have $30 billion under management, it's easier to allocate part of your portfolio to different emerging managers, to specific needs and to create a more equitable industry.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like, that's right. The initiatives are sort of top down from the larger allocators, and they can take the lead on it. So it sounds like, for smaller, lesser known managers to raise capital, given this type of, just word of mouth and network, it just sounds like it's more difficult. But do you think then, the advent of more virtual meetings and the comfort level with more virtual meetings then has changed the landscape such that it becomes more competitive or not more competitive, meaning you get to see more of these lesser known managers as a result of, maybe the silver lining as a result of the silver lining in the pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a barrier breaker. I think, if you get it's much easier, people are going to be going forward more willing to take a call, an introductory call. The more as our boards change, as people roll off or retire from boards, going to be replacing boards with newer, younger individuals and more diverse boards. When the industry, or for us, we're preaching diversity in our consultants and the portfolio companies And then I look around and some of my boards, and we have our own. We do have to become more diversified, and I make it known that but things take time. You can't suddenly shift off people off boards for that reason. So you have to go out and educate people. You have to identify people who would be good for the future board when the opportunity opens up. So if people aren't especially at the appointed positions, if you don't know that individuals have this skill set, are in the industry, and then it's harder to get them on board. But but as trustees, if we're constantly looking around, who some of them are restricted to your community, so you have to, in some of the boards, you have to live in that town or that city to be on the board. So so that narrows it down, and just reaching out to people, and then also just working with the managers. They might know somebody on another board. Having time, you might not be in the same community, you might be in another part of the country, but you happen to cross paths and just gain more educated, reaching out to another trustee who say, oh, here's an opportunity, here's a great manager. For us, we're not looking for an emerging manager, but you might be, and so definitely that word of mouth and continuing to improve the industry.
Definitely. So it's networks matter, virtually or otherwise. So why don't we pivot? Speaking of virtual networks, we're now, touching on the point about time and the concept of time. We are now miraculously a year past the 1 year mark on the pandemic. I think a lot of us were very surprised by how long this has been, and I think this is probably sets the cadence for, as you mentioned, changes is methodical and slow, but at the same time, time does pass. So speaking of it, what has it been like for you this past year? In terms of the pandemic, have you picked up any fun hobbies? Some of the folks out there, as you probably remember from the social media craze in the beginning, everyone was baking bread. I certainly did not bake bread. I know my limitations, but what did you do with as part of your new pandemic hobbies?
So living in the suburbs, I've walked around the block many times. I have names for every pet, everybody's pet. The dogs that run out, who at first came up storming out because they haven't seen somebody walking in the streets in a long time. And now, the dog comes up and wags its tail, and I do that. Gardening, I've been gardening for a long time. Years ago, when I first started getting involved in the community, I joked, oh, my garden, the following summer, my garden looks awful because I'm always in meetings, and now it's back to years ago where it should have been. Also, just I think getting a year of, we always talk about spending more time with family, right? And it might be different parts of people's careers at some point to say, the time that you can never get back is the time with your family. To live 24/7 pretty much, except going to the food store and with your family, it has been a blessing. For me, I have 2 kids, both of them will have gone through this virtual graduation of high school where, the proms and the traditional, what we always think and what they saw on TV as that senior year experience, they did not have it. One's in college, one's going off to college. So nobody's going to walk away from this unscathed. I think we're all going to come out differently, hopefully better, more understanding, more patient, and the whole remote workforce shift for part of the, for some, part of the industries, shows that we could be flexible. People shouldn't, if they have to leave, let them leave. Chances are you're going to make up that time, do much better if you work with your employees and different individuals. So I think that's going to be a lasting thing. Technology, not everybody's good with technology. I have people I know who had to go back in the office because maybe it was not enough space or too much going on, and so they work differently. They might go on different hours now, and that whole flexible schedule I think is going to be something that a benefit of this. During snowstorms, for us, being a government, we never closed down, and the state could close down, and depending on what your role is, for me, my department, we'd never go in a snowstorm, but now we could easily log on, continue working, so you're getting that efficiency. Things become more seamless. You can take calls, and might have a snowstorm here, somebody else in another part of the world is going to have a sunny, very sunny, so you don't necessarily have that. And then I mean, even people coming out of college, probably, getting those internships, right, where they're not in person, or that first job where suddenly you're remote and you never really met your colleagues in person, it has to be very challenging for upright, time we're trying to recruit, and then and they're going to bring new skill sets that we probably never would have imagined, starting a new job and coming out of school without ever having in-person meetings. So
Yeah, so it sounds like you took the words out of my last question, which is the lasting effect. And it sounds like from your perspective, it really comes down to the virtual element is actually a lasting effect, which then, creates flexibility, creates connections, but at the same time, altering sort of the way we connect with people. And speaking of sort of connections, like I'm just super honored that, for example, the fact that we otherwise in a non-pandemic world, you and I would be sitting in a room and having this interview, but instead we're doing it all virtually. So I very much appreciate you making the time today, and I'm so honored to have had the opportunity to interview you for TIE 10. So thank you very much, Eric. I very much appreciate it.
thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Ty,
Okay.